The morning light spilled gently over the tarmac, glinting off the silver wings of Flight 227 as passengers hurried through the terminal, clutching coffee cups and boarding passes. Among them was David Miller, a 42-year-old firefighter from Pennsylvania heading home after a training seminar. His wife had begged him to take a few extra days off, but duty had called, and David had always believed that showing up mattered. He smiled politely at the attendant, tucked his worn wallet back into his jacket, and stepped onto the plane that would change everything. In seat 19A, Sarah Jennings sat nervously, twisting her engagement ring around her finger. She hated flying but was traveling to San Francisco to surprise her fiancé, Ethan. Across the aisle, Tom Alvarez, a quiet software engineer, adjusted his glasses and glanced through the window at the endless blue stretching beyond the runway. None of them knew that the next few hours would become a testament to what ordinary people are capable of when the world collapses around them. At first, the flight was calm. The hum of engines, the murmur of small talk, the rhythmic clink of cups as the flight attendants began their service. David leaned back, watching a young mother soothe her child a few rows ahead, and felt that familiar warmth of seeing humanity in its simplest form. But then came a sound that didn't belong, the sharp metallic scrape from the front, followed by a scream. Every conversation halted. A man in a dark jacket stood suddenly, his eyes wild, shouting words no one wanted to believe. For a moment, the world froze. The attendants screamed, passengers ducked, and confusion turned into horror as the truth began to settle in. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't a misunderstanding. The plane had been taken. Sarah clutched her seatbelt, her heart hammering. The intercom crackled, and a trembling voice announced that they were changing course. David's instincts kicked in. Years of running toward danger, not away from it, had shaped him, and now those instincts told him one thing. This plane was in trouble, and no one was coming to save them. He looked around and saw fear everywhere, faces drained of color, hands shaking, lips whispering prayers. But beneath the terror, he saw something else, resolve. People were looking to each other, not just for comfort, but for answers. Tom, shaking, whispered, "We have to do something." His voice was barely audible, but David heard it. Sarah looked up, tears brimming, and nodded. A few seats away, an older man, a former Marine named Frank Dalton, met David's eyes. No words were needed. They all knew. Quietly, they began to gather near the back, away from the hijackers. Whispered plans formed in trembling voices. "If we wait, they'll reach the city," David said. "If we act, maybe we stop them. Maybe we give others a chance." There was silence for a moment. Sarah's hands were cold as ice. "But we might die," she said softly. David's gaze didn't waver. "We might, but if we don't, more people will." Those words hung heavy in the stale air. Around them, passengers listened. A mother clutched her baby closer. A businessman who'd barely spoken since boarding began to cry quietly. Yet, one by one, heads nodded. There was no anger, no bravado, just a quiet, human understanding that sometimes the right thing demands everything. Sarah borrowed a phone from a nearby passenger. Her trembling fingers dialed Ethan's number. When he answered, she couldn't hold back her tears. "I love you," she said. "Something's happening on the plane. I just wanted to say thank you for everything." He asked what she meant, but she couldn't explain. She only whispered, "Tell my mom I'm not afraid anymore." Frank, the Marine, handed his wedding ring to the woman beside him. "If you make it," he said, "please give this to my wife." The woman nodded through tears, clutching it like a sacred promise. In the cockpit, chaos reigned. The hijackers shouted in broken English, forcing the pilots down. But then came the pounding. Fists, shoulders, and courage slamming against the reinforced door. The passengers were coming. Shouts of, "Let's go," and, "Now," echoed through the cabin. David led the charge, followed by Frank and Tom, their fear transformed into something greater. For a fleeting moment, Sarah saw them, the men who refused to let evil win, and she prayed for them all. The plane lurched violently. The hijackers fought back, but the passengers didn't stop. They used whatever they could: food trays, fire extinguishers, their own hands. Screams filled the air, but underneath it all was something fierce and unstoppable: unity. People who had never met, who might have never spoken on any other day, were now bound by a single purpose: to protect lives they would never see. David caught one hijacker off guard, tackling him to the ground. The others surged forward. Tom shouted coordinates to someone near the front, hoping they could break into the cockpit. The world blurred into noise, sweat, blood, and the thunder of engines. Somewhere amid it all, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for those below, for strangers who would never know their names but would live because of them. The plane began to tilt, shuddering violently. People screamed, but no one turned back. David felt the force of gravity pulling him sideways, but he pushed harder. Through the tiny window in the cockpit door, he saw the ground rising fast, fields and trees rushing upward like a painting ripped open. He thought of his wife, his daughter's laugh, the warmth of morning coffee. For one heartbeat, he felt peace. Then, with a final burst of courage, he shouted, "Now!" The impact came like thunder, and then, silence. When the world learned what had happened, the headlines spoke of tragedy. But those who looked deeper saw something more, an act of love, of selflessness, of ordinary people doing the extraordinary. Families gathered in tears, but their grief carried pride. They understood that their loved ones hadn't just died, they had saved. Weeks later, in a quiet park not far from where the plane went down, Sarah's fiancé Ethan visited a small memorial. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves whispered in the wind. He placed a single white rose beneath her name and whispered, "You were brave when I couldn't be there. You gave others tomorrow." Nearby, a little boy tugged at his mother's hand, asking what the names on the memorial meant. She knelt down, smiling softly. "They were heroes," she said. "When the world was afraid, they were brave." Years passed, but their story lived on, not in history books alone, but in every act of kindness, every moment someone chose compassion over fear. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right in spite of it. The passengers of Flight 227 had known they wouldn't survive, yet they fought anyway. And in that final stand, they showed humanity at its purest, united not by fate, but by choice. David's wife, standing beneath the fading sunset years later, whispered to the wind, "You kept your promise." The wind carried her words across the field, where wildflowers had grown, delicate, resilient, defiant. Each petal seemed to glow with quiet strength, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light finds a way through. They were ordinary people, teachers, soldiers, parents, dreamers. But in those final minutes, they became something far greater. Their courage didn't end with the fall, it began there. Every life saved, every sunrise that followed, was their victory. They had faced terror with love, despair with hope, and death with dignity. And though the world moved on, the echo of their bravery remained, a whisper in the sky, a lesson for all time. In the end, it wasn't about how their journey ended, but what they left behind. A legacy of courage, a reminder that even in moments when everything seems lost, humanity can rise, stronger, united, and unafraid. They knew they wouldn't survive, but they chose to fight anyway. And because of that choice, the world would never forget what it means to be truly alive.